Iker. La fama.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome everyone to this event organized by the Spanish Green Growth Group, the Spanish Association for Energy Economics, and CAF, the Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for being here, the attendees, and especially the speakers. We know how complicated it is to be able to find a slot in this hectic international conference. And it's even better because this is the second edition of this seminar, because we did something, it was not exactly the same topic, but we did something very similar last year in the COP in Egypt. So it's a good tradition that we would like to continue over time. The topic for today's session is climate solutions in Ibero-America, moving towards clean energy deployment. So as you can see, we're talking about a very ambitious topic. Many different things could be said about that, but we're in very good company because we have here very important companies. We have here multilateral development banks. We have research centers. So hopefully we can draw a few interesting lessons from this session. My name is Kepa Solaun. I work in a company called Global Factor. But today here, I am here as a president of the Spanish Association for Energy Economics, which is the Spanish branch of the International Association for Energy Economics, which basically is a group of professionals from academia, from public sector, and also from the private sector, who believe that economics can play a very important role in the analysis and solution of energy problems. We do a lot of outreach activities, workshops, events, and of course our annual Congress, which is like the jewel of the crown. So I'm just going to say a few words before I give the floor to the speakers, which they are really the ones that will really make a difference. But just to give some context to today's topic, we know that we're talking a lot about energy in this COP, whether phasing out, phasing down, fossil fuels. We are at the Energy Day today, so we know that it has always been a crucial topic, but probably particularly in this specific COP. From the point of view of Latin America, we know that the starting point is exceptional when it comes to resources. We know that 1/3 of global resources of silver, lithium, and copper are located in Latin America, and also that we have a very good track record of renewable electricity generation, which is around 60%, which is one of the highest rate on average in the world. So we have a very good starting point, but also we know that we're facing quite a lot of challenges. We are seeing some reports about energy scenarios in the region. For example, a very recent one from the International Energy Agency, pointing to the fact that they expect a very, very slow decline of fossil fuels in the region, so that the energy transition will take quite a lot of time, and in particularly in a moment where we don't expect a very high growth rate in Latin America and the Caribbean. According to the UN Economic Commission for Latin America, we're talking about 1.7% on average for this year, 1.5% for the next year. So it's a little bit hard to be able to gather all the investment that is necessary for the energy transition in this context of of economic growth. So this is why we believe that exchanging of innovative solutions and practices is absolutely essential if we really want to make a big change in this topic and in the region. And hopefully we can draw some lessons about it from the discussions that we will be having today. When it comes to the agenda for today, first we will have two keynote speakers that are seated here with me, Eva Pagan and Alicia Montalvo. Then we will have a panel with very relevant experts on the topic, and finally we will have some conclusions for that. And we have 90 minutes, a little bit less than 90 minutes for doing that. Okay, so I will please ask all the speakers and the panelists to stick to the time allocated, because otherwise it's going to be complicated to finish on time, as we're talking about such an important but very broad topic. So with no more delay, I'm going to give the floor to the first keynote speaker, Eva Pagan. She's Corporate Director of Sustainability and Studies at Redeia. She has more than 25 years of experience in the electricity sector. She has developed her professional career in Redeia because previously she was General Manager of the International Business and General Manager of Transport. Throughout her career, she has been the Spanish member of several international study committees related to the electricity sector, as well as president and board member of several Redeia subsidiaries. She has a very deep curriculum, I can assure you that. She's an industrial engineer from Universidad Politécnica de Madrid, and also an economist from the university, from the UNED, from the Spanish Distance Learning University. She also has many different postgraduate studies at Polytechnic University of Madrid, IESE Business School, ESADE, and Harvard Business School. So, Eva, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Always talk about energy on Ibero-America is a good idea. So thank you for being here. It's a pleasure in the name of Redeia to talk about a little bit, about 10 minutes about it. This morning I wanted to start saying that this morning I read in a CAF panel one logo that says Global Challenge, Regional Solutions. And I think that when we are talking about energy transition and climate change, this is exactly what we are going to discuss during this afternoon. So let me tell you just briefly who is Redeia, and later I would like to speak briefly about 3 points. How we are doing the energy transition. I think this is the first thing that we have to be sure that everybody understands where we are talking about energy transition, why we need grids, and finally, what are the challenges that we have developing the grids. So just a few words about Redeia. Redeia is the transmission and operating system in Spain. We have we manage all the transmission about 45,000 kilometers in Spain, and we are also responsible for balancing the generation and the demand every second in Spain. We have the honor to be the first transmission and system operator in the world. We are not only in Spain, that we are also in South America, in Chile, in Peru, and Brazil for the next 20 years, starting in Peru and more recently in Brazil. And which is what we think about transmission. Well, we think that we are an important factor, that we are very committed to help to do this transition. And I start with the first point, that how are we doing to do the energy transition? And I think this is a reflection that everybody has to be really clear, because we have a double advantage when we are talking about electricity grids. In one way, because through the energy transition, we are going to clean the energy that we are coming from the electric mix. If we are increasing the renewable energies, we will decarbonize all the energy, all the electricity. And in the other way, through the electrification of the economy, we are going to decarbonize also. So we have these two ways, decarbonizing the energy mix, the electricity mix, and also helping other sectors to decarbonize through the electrification. And just some figures that you said about the World Energy Outlook report that says that in Latin America, the electricity is the fastest growing final form of energy. And this is the focus when we are talking about Ibero-America, that electricity demand, the scenarios for 2050 in those countries are forecasting an increase of the 90% of electricity today. No, this is a good news because if we look for those countries in the region that are achieving the next zero emission, almost the 50% of them are in this path to the net zero emissions. This represents more or less the 65% of the GPD of the region and the 60% of its energy related to CO2 load. So this is the way that we are doing in Europe, that we are doing in Ibero-America, and it's a no-return path. So why we need grids? Well, if we are talking about developing renewable energies, we need grids to be sure that all the renewable energy coming from hydraulic, coming from solar PV, or coming from the wind is integrated in the system to give energy whatever or whenever or wherever we need it. So we need to be sure that our grids are strong, that are robust, that are resilient, that are prepared for this new electricity. And we need also to have robust grids. We need interconnection. There are many projects in Ibero-America dealing with interconnection, some in a very first phase, but others working together. And during interconnection, we will improve and expand these goals that we are having. And in our experience, we have experience in Chile because we participated and we own with our partner, ENGIE, the interconnection between the north and the center of Chile. This is an impressive project that it's allowing Chile to increase, and all the generation that is produced in the north of the country is coming to the center of the country. So let's go to the third point. If we want to do the energy transition, if we need the grids to do possible the energy transition, we have to develop all the infrastructure with some environmental challenge. Probably this is one of the biggest challenges. The other one is the financing. I think you will later talk about it. But we are talking about investments that are looking for the long term. So they need stability, regulatory stability, and they have to deal right now, that is mandatory to deal with other topics that we cannot forget, those dealing to sustainability or environmental aspects. I think some years ago, the best project was the project the engineers designed. Today, this is not possible. The best project is the project that the society and the engineers and all the stakeholders, they identify this is the best project. No? So from our experience that we are applying in Spain and also in the countries we are in Latin America, we have 4 points very present in the development of our project. The first one is the protection of the natural, environmental, and biodiversity conservation. I think especially that if we are talking about all the countries in Ibero-America, is such a big amount of biodiversity that we have to protect. And this is essential when we are designing from the very beginning of the project. And in a way of avoiding forest areas, if we cannot avoid setting preventing actions, and if we cannot even do this, corrective measures to minimize the impacts of the grids, restoring affected areas if necessary, just to go to arrive to a point where we are very committed in Redeia. Our goal is to have a positive impact on natural capital in all our projects we develop. Not neutral, we want to go further. We want to go positive. Another important point is the application of circularity emission reduction criteria. I think during these days we are hearing a lot about raw materials, about how to minimize the materials we are using in our constructions. We are talking about to minimize the generation of waste during the projects and during this life cycle of the transmission grids. And this is one of the important points that we identify in our roadmap. And in this point, talking about circularity and emission reduction, I wanted also to point that for us is very important to take into account the collaboration between the different actors in the value chain. And when we are talking about this, we want that all our value chains have our objectives, and our objectives are the objectives of the other parts. Another third point I mentioned before is the social acceptance. The best project is the project we can build. And the project we can build is a project that we have discussed with our communities where we go, and with something that our president says a lot, that we have to gain all of us. If somebody is not gaining, this is not the correct project. And because one of the problems for the development of the business is the social acceptance and also the delay of the permitting. And I am sure that if we put our accent in according and working with the communities and with the social impacts, for sure that the permitting process, with the help of the administrations and regulatories, I think maybe we can short these times that are really long. So, finally, and not because it's less important, is talking about climate change adaptation. I would like to remember that when we are building grids, we are building assets that are going to be there for decades. And this means that if we are going to build things that are going to be at the end of our century, we have to take into account all the changes in the design and assessing different possible climate scenarios to ensure the resilience of the transmission grids. And just to tell you in this point that at Redeia we have developed an analysis and assessment of our risk and opportunities for the climate change. We have done it for Spain, and since 2021 we have done also for our assets in Latin America. And so, as conclusions, I think that we need to decarbonize through the electrification and the change in the composition of our energy, and the development of these new facilities have to be necessary with the implementation of the grids with the characteristics I have mentioned.
Thank you very much, Eva, for providing this comprehensive view of the topic. This is not just generation, this is not just distribution, so much more, and so many actors involved. Very, very interesting. The next keynote speaker is Alicia Montalvo. She is Manager of Climate Action and Positive Biodiversity at CAF, Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean. Before CAF, Alicia held important positions such as Chief Counselor of the Economic and Commercial Office in Bogota of the Spanish Embassy, Executive Director for several countries at the Inter-American Development Bank, General Director of ICEX, Spain Export and Investment, General Director of Climate Change of the Spanish Ministry of Environment, member of the Economic Policy Committee at the European Union, and many more. She holds a degree in Economics and Business Administration from the University of Valencia, and a master's degree in Public Administration from Harvard University. In the academic arena, she has taught at the Carlos III University, and he has also participated in many different international conferences and lectures and articles on environmental economics and sustainability. So, over to you, Alicia.
No, thank you very much. First of all, thanks. It's a pleasure to be here with you, Kepa. We know each other since many years ago, and it's also an honor to be here with Eva. Perhaps from my background, you can understand that my approach to the energy transition and the climate solutions comes from the economic side. In my case, I came from the economy to the climate and to the energy. So for me, it's important that we always take into consideration the importance, the relevance of all the economic aspects that have to do with how to support people in the way they live. And now, in my position in the Latin American, the Caribbean countries, I have to learn a lot about the countries. And I see that the energy matrix in Latin America and the Caribbean is cleaner than at the global level. And sometimes I wonder, when we talk about transition, energy transition, that we are very advanced in this transition. The problem perhaps is that we need to do more to finalize, to really reach the net zero we all are looking for and the decarbonization. But now we have like the countries where 90% of the electric generation is coming from renewables. On average, it's around 60%. So I think it's quite relevant. And above all, what is important is the countries that are implementing clean energy policies. They see that this is good. They see that they are creating employment, not only that they are contributing to the national NDCs, but it's good for the economy, it's good for the people. But at the same time, Latin American and Caribbean region is very diverse. The situation of the countries is very different. So I would say that the transition in the region has to do not only with decarbonization, but second, on adaptation, as Eva mentioned, because most of the clean energy in the region is hydro, and this is very sensitive to climate change. So that's why there is a need to move forward non-conventional clean energies. And also the question of biodiversity that has also been mentioned. So, another problem is the question of the fiscal revenues coming from exports of oil and gas. And these three transitions, the transition for net zero, the transition to have a more resilient transmission and distribution system or generation system, and the transition towards a more diversified economy that makes possible not to depend so much on the oil and gas is important because you need to see that for a comprehensive manner. And this is what we are doing in CAF. We consider that the just transition has to take into consideration first that as the Paris Agreement forces, it is important that the peak in the emissions in Latin American and Caribbean region takes longer. These days we are listening a lot about phasing out completely the fossil fuels, and many countries in the region endorse that, but of course they consider they need more time to do that. Because now the problem is that there are still many people who has not access to the energy. The technologies to really make possible the full deployment of renewables are not ready in the region. There is a need of financial and technological resources. So what the CAF is doing in this respect? First, we consider that we are one of the institutions that still consider that it's important to finance gas projects. And I think this is very relevant because we consider that the gas could be and should be a transition source of energy. But we don't feel so much happy because, of course, we know that it's important as we all are aligned with the Paris Agreement. We consider that it's important not to challenge the technologies that really could make possible to go to a full renewable model. So we need, this is I would say, a challenge for us how to decide, how to really make sure that the investments we are doing are not threatening the possibility of the deployment of renewables at all, completely. So we work in both senses. First, ensuring the access to energy at an affordable price. I think this is important because the energy poverty in the region still is high. But second, we need to run in order to implement the transition towards a clean, full model. In this case, what we are doing also is to work to mobilize private investment. And I think this is crucial because in many countries still the regulations are not mature enough. We need to work with the national system, institutions, still a lot of work to do. So we call that the enabling conditions that are necessary to really make a full implementation of a clean energy model. We are doing that, and we are working very much with green funds in order to bring clean energy to the countries. But still, we see that a lot of money will be needed. And, well, CAF is investing almost around 12 billion every year. Half of that goes to adaptation, which is important. And the other, the remaining is for biodiversity and for mitigation. And I would like to say at this stage that we are making here a commitment for adaptation, mobilizing new resources on adaptation. We yesterday, no, the day before yesterday, we made a commitment to devote $15 billion from now to 2030 for adaptation. And for us, this is part also of the clean transition, because what we are trying to do is to work in risk management and also adaptation, and the energy model is part of that. So we are also working in, as Eva mentioned, in making sure that all the energy infrastructures are taking into consideration the biodiversity challenges. We now, in fact, we are working here an ecosystemic approach in all our projects to make sure that everything really respects the limits of the ecosystem. We work in the idea that Latin America and the Caribbean has the solution to the energy challenge because, first, we have a huge potential for renewable energies, both solar and wind. Second, we have an important amount of critical minerals, which I think that this is a very relevant issue because we want to really support countries in the use of these critical minerals, not only to export them, but to make sure that there is a value chain in the countries that make possible a diversification of the economy that at the same time will be needed to substitute the resources coming for the export of coal and other fossil fuels. So what I'm trying to say is that we look at the transition from an integral point of view, not only going towards a net zero or decarbonized model in terms of mitigation, but also taking into consideration adaptation, impacts on biodiversity, but also the diversification in the sources of revenues, which are really very relevant in the region because now, as you well know, the levels of debt are very high and countries need also to finance the development and the alleviation of poverty, which is important in the region. So to me, I think it's important that we look at the moving towards clean energy deployment from an integral point of view, taking all these elements into consideration and also support countries in making this path in a way that does not create a lot of social disturbances, which could be very risky also in terms of attracting investment. So everything goes together. But I would like to say that as Latin American and Caribbean countries, they all have endorsed the Paris Agreement. I'm sure that we will go there. We will go to the net zero. We are listening a lot of commitments these days coming from Latin American countries, and we are sure they will reach this position, but they need a different approach. They need to be listened in a different manner, and we want to really stress that Latin American and Caribbean region will be the solution for a clean energy model in the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alicia. You promised to give a comprehensive view, not just climate change itself, but in particular, you said that you were going to give it an economic context, and we're not disappointed. No? That's absolutely what you did. And you have also suggested some interesting topics for the debate in the panel, like the connection between climate change and social protection, the topic of natural gas, which is also something that probably can make some people think and discuss. So that was very interesting. So thank you very much. Please give another applause to our keynote speakers. Because now we're moving to the panel. So we have a spectacular panel today with Valerie Hickey from the World Bank, Hilen Meirovich from the IDB Invest, Antoni Vallabriga from BBVA, and Martin Porter from the Cambridge Institute for Sustainable Leadership. So please come join me. I'm glad you make it. I was worried. Yes. No problem. So, as I said, very interesting topics, and so many things to dig into, because it's not just about setting a regulation or setting a policy. There are many things that are linked and that we should take into account. So as I said, today we have a very interesting panel. I will start with a very, very brief introduction of the panelists and ask you each one question, and then I will ask you a more general question to all of you. Okay? So first we have Valerie Hickey. She has nearly 20 years of experience in different leadership positions at the World Bank. She is currently Global Director for Environment, Natural Resources, and Blue Economy. Before joining the World Bank, Valerie worked for WWF, Wildlife Conservation Society, and the U.S. National Park Service. She holds a PhD in Environmental Science and Policy from Duke University. So my question for you, Valerie, you have been working at the World Bank for quite a lot, and we know what type of projects and action is the World Bank implementing in the region to mitigate climate change and also to face climate change impacts. So my question for you would be, what do you perceive as the primary challenges when it comes to engaging with governments in these regions, when it comes to adopting policies on clean energy, and not just adopting policies, but also really executing things, because the topic of this workshop is about deployment, so how can we can make it real? Thank you.
No, thank you, Kepa. And I was sitting in the audience there. I was actually going to call security because Alicia had stolen my entire talking points. So I can make my answer very fast. But no, thank you for including us on this. And, I want to start, before I talk about the challenges, Latin America has something in particular that the other regions don't have as much of, which is one that it already has, as Alicia explained, huge experience in clean energy. It knows how to do clean energy. It has very sophisticated power markets, which we don't see in other regions. And it already has large engagement of the private sector. Those are three really important things that are going to help with this next generation of clean energy. And I say next generation because the experience Latin America has had in clean energy has been that first generation focusing mostly on hydropower. And that's the first challenge that I wanted to mention. It's what Alicia said, that look at Brazil in 2021 suffering one of the worst droughts it's ever had in the longest time, which led to a $6 billion additional cost for the electricity sector because it's so dependent on hydropower, and what's hydropower dependent on? Water. Right? So Latin America is going to suffer a little bit because its clean energy, most of it being hydropower, is in trouble because the water cycle is changing because of climate change. And the converse of that challenge is because most of the experience has been exactly in hydropower, it doesn't have as much experience and institutional experience, not just technical capacity, but institutional capacity, policy experience in other types of renewables. And not all renewables are the same. Working on solar is not the same as working on hydro, is not the same as working on wind, is not the same as working on green hydrogen. So that's the first challenge, is this lack of experience and capacity in other types of renewables, though it does have experience in renewables. I think the second challenge is regulatory stability. Unfortunately, this is something Latin America shares with a lot of other regions, is political choices being made that makes regulatory uncertainty a reality. And why does this matter? It matters because the financing gap in Latin America, on average, for every year until 2050, in order to make a transition to the next generation of renewable energies, is going to be about $27 billion every year. Or, excuse me, $10 billion every year for the next 27 to 2050. Most of that can't come from the public sector. Domestic credit markets are relatively limited, so it's going to have to come from international private sector. And international private sector isn't going to invest large scale in a country where the rules of the game could change, particularly because of the large upfront financing costs and the long-term return on investment in some renewable energies. Means you need that political stability. So I think that's the second challenge that Latin America really has to struggle with. And financing really being that third challenge. And that's something where in particular institutions like the World Bank, IDB, CAF, have got to play a stronger role in de-risking. It's a little bit like we've done in Chile in this past year, helping them think through green hydrogen and providing $150 million in concessional financing to put in a green hydrogen facility that does two things. That's attracting private sector financing. One, it's doing direct co-investment that allows the rest of the private sector investment to be at slightly lower cost. So it's basically reducing the price for the private sector to come in because we're taking a first loss. The second thing it's doing is it's actually putting money in a reserve, so directly dealing with that operational and political risk to make sure that the company knows, should something go wrong, that there's money in reserve to pay it back. And the banks know that they'll be paid back. And so that's important. These sorts of blended finance instruments are going to become more and more important. But all the blended finance in the world, again, is not going to be of any use where you don't have institutional strength in this next generation of clean energy, where you don't have good counterparts to work with, and where the rules of the game are shifting. And they're not stable enough to attract that long-term private capital.
Interesting. Thank you, Valerie. We have moved a little bit, no? Valerie was mentioning the private sector a couple of times, but now I would like to continue this conversation with Hilen. Hilen has more than 15 years of experience working on climate change at the IDB Group. At present, she is the head of climate change at IDB Invest. And as such, she leads a specialized team of experts that seek to provide added value and innovation to IDB Invest transaction, and they have mobilized more than US 50 million in technical assistance resources from climate funds. Okay? Hilen is a political scientist from Universidad Católica de Córdoba in Argentina. She received a master's degree from Hebrew University and a master's degree and PhD degree from Georgetown University, USA. So Hilen, yes, Valerie was providing us with some background on the energy sector in the region. Specifically when it comes to the private sector, what are you finding there? What are the lessons that we can learn from them engaging in this topic and the challenges that they found?
Well, thank you so much first for the invitation, for being back here again, and having esteemed colleagues as co-panelists or keynote speakers like Alicia. It's nice to be back talking again in another COP. And the good thing is that we can show results, right? you talked about green hydrogen. I'm sure Tony's going to talk about other things that BBVA is also doing. So this is great. So what is IDB Invest, and how are we working in the energy transition and energy deployment? So first of all, IDB Invest is the private sector arm of the IDB group. So we work with corporates, we work with project sponsors, and we work with financial institutions to support them in deploying resources for climate action. And in that context, I think that I would agree with Valerie that the role of blended finance is critical, because we use those resources very strategically. We use them as following the principles of blended finance that we have as MDBs to tackle and it links back to what Valerie was just saying before. These all can happen if there are projects on the ground. And I'm sure you've heard it a lot already. Bankable projects are critical, and for that, having a bankable project in Uruguay may look different than in Barbados, or in Bahamas, or in the Caribbean in general, or El Salvador and Honduras. So being able to create, at the same time that we can do financing, the public sectors of the institutions work on the project preparation is critical. And the final point that I would say is just to not forget about just transition. And I think it's what Eva was just talking about, and Alicia also talked about. These projects cannot forget about the social aspect to them. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Hilen. Very interesting in providing those many perspectives, no? And we know that there are many layers, no, that interact in this space. Now I'm going to present Martin Porter. He's the executive chair of the Brussels office at the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership. He became a senior associate for SISL in 2011, and prior to that, he developed his public affairs consultancy activities largely in the area. And he has led advocacy campaigns with many different associations and multinational clients. He gained a degree in European Studies from the University of Bath and went on to be awarded a doctorate for the same institutions for a thesis on environmental issues, in particularly around EU legislation on packaging. So welcome, Martin, to this panel. My question for you, based on your expertise and the expertise of the institution that you represent here, is about engaging civil society, no? Because also a little bit about the private sector, because I know you do have quite a lot of expertise in the private sector, but so far I think we haven't delved into the question of civil society, and I would like to ask you, how we can really engage civil society on that. It was also mentioned for some of the keynote speakers, the need for acceptance, and it's becoming even more relevant when it comes to renewable energy. So what's your view on that?
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation, and indeed the excellent initial remarks and comments we've just heard. I'm not an economist, which may differentiate me from many of the people here, but a lot of my work now involves, obviously, economics. And all of these issues that we're talking about today are only solved when we think about economics as involving people, communities. I think we've heard it from many of the speakers. And it struck me, actually, hearing about the experience in Latin America and the similarities and differences that we've heard about, how many of the experiences that I particularly have worked on at a European level, so across Europe as much as in Brussels, are very, very similar, even if, I think as you were saying, there are very clear differences in how deployment will have to take place in individual countries, in particular geographies. The underlying challenges, and therefore how to think about the involvement of other stakeholders, civil society, are very, very similar. And that's the thing that struck me most about what almost everyone has said here. The need to take, much of my work is much more upstream than downstream. So the deployment challenges, how to mobilize finance for projects, is not typically where most of my work has been. Most of the work that I have done with progressive business alliances that involve communities of NGOs, civil society, has been more upstream to try to create the sense of regulatory predictability and certainty, which you talked about, that will enable the confidence of investors to grow, that policymakers want to see the type of transition in energy, but also other areas of the economy, because they can see that there is collaboration and partnership between businesses, so not just an individual business, but a value chain or cross-sectoral groupings. The Spanish Green Growth Group is one excellent example of that, and I think that logic could be applied in Latin America just as effectively as it is in Spain and across Europe. But also involving the communities and their representatives as far upstream as possible in order to be able to then develop solutions which early on are agreed and agreeable to those other communities. That's not to say that the experiences that I've had in working with the Corporate Leaders Group, which is the European equivalent of a cross-sectoral business grouping, a little bit like the Spanish Green Growth Group. We've not completely succeeded in this, but we have, I think, made some steps forward because we regularly meet with representatives. You mentioned you worked with WWF. I'm regularly meeting with representatives of WWF in Brussels and similar organizations and unions and consumer groups, so that when we talk to representatives of government, whether that is national government in Spain, the European Commission, the European Parliament, and the Council of Ministers, we are often representing a collective voice that incorporates views that are shared by consumers, but particularly unions or environmental NGOs, so that when the deployment questions come, we have a greater chance of being able to demonstrate that we are supportive of a deployment that also achieves rapid or rapid deployment, but which, as was said several times, is integrated, it's holistic. It has already factored in the need for biodiversity being respected, communities being engaged, and their local rights being respected as well. So I think the approach and experience that we have had, which includes working with the Spanish Green Growth Group in particular, has a lot of merit because it is translatable into other geographies. Latin America, I'm sure, being one, notwithstanding all the differences. So I think we often obviously talk about the differences, and that's important. But I think there's much more here in terms of similarity of approach. both conceptually, but also in practice, in collaboration, and being open-minded to solutions, which I think could be developed across Europe and Latin America, certainly Spain and Latin America, learning on European experience, not all of which is positive. And I would say the recent experience that we have in Europe is that we've realized we have to deploy more quickly ourselves as well.
Yeah.
And there are many local challenges of deployment, which are very similar to the ones that have been mentioned, that are very, very equivalent to those which you will see in Latin America. And we don't, therefore, have experience which is always perfect, but we hopefully can learn from those mistakes or errors and improve on them. So I think there's a lot to learn from the experience of collaboration and working together across businesses with other communities, upstream as much as downstream in the deployment phase.
Thank you, Martin. Very interesting insights. Now we're going to move on to the financial sector has been mentioned a couple of times. The private sector, right? Yeah, because we have a lot of financial sector on the table, you're right. And we have specifically Antoni Vallabriga. He's the Global Head of Responsible Business at BBVA. He's co-chair of the Global Steering Committee at UNEP FI, and member of the steering group at the Net Zero Banking Alliance, chair of the Sustainable Finance Expert Group at EBF, and member of, you cannot imagine how many groups in the industry related to finance and sustainable finance. So my question for you, Antoni, would be to elaborate a little bit on this, no? Because when I talk to the private sector in Latin America, also in Spain, no? They are saying that the financial sector is lagging behind, no? That they don't provide us with the resources you need, but on the other hand, when I listen to people from the private sector, no, you seem to have lots of resources and lots of possibilities, no, for these industries to engage. So how do you see that, and what do you think are the challenges, no, in terms of climate action related to this area and this topic?
Okay, well, thanks for the invitation. A great pleasure to be here. And well, I like a lot some of the comments that all my colleagues here did in terms of the challenges that we have in terms of attract private capital, the challenge of nature, also the power of alliances like the Grupo Español de Crecimiento Verde, and also the mention that we need to mobilize private capital. No? So the idea in brief is that we have a role to play, no, to help the whole economy to transition. So the idea is to promote this change as a middleman, because we depend on our clients' decisions at the end of the day, and the government policies. So we are those that have to make possible that transformation of the world, not only driving investments to the pure green activities, but also investments in those activities difficult to abate. So because there are some sectors like production of cement, steel, shipping, aviation, and many more that really need to transform the business model in some cases, even oil and gas or power. So this is our role, no? And as was mentioned, the challenge that we have in low middle income countries and in the region, obviously, is how to attract capital at the scale that is needed. No? I am member of the Financial Advisory Board of the International Energy Agency that was set only 1 year ago to have a structured dialogue with the financial industry, because the IEEE recognized that the financial sector is using more the scenarios and the data they provide. No? So, and they have created this advisory board. And some data that already reflect here, no? That 60% of renewable energy. They said, well, in 2050 we are going to have 80%, even for the current policy scenarios. So, I mean, without changing that, no? And in terms of investment, they said 150 billion will have to grow clean investments in energy by 2030, double the figure that we have today, and rise fivefold by 2050. And we will have this, instead of 1:1 that we have now, we will have 4:1 when compare fossil fuels with clean energy. No? But we need to attract capital at a scale, and 80% of this investment will be financed by private financial institutions. No? There we can comment about which are our requests in this and expectations about this famous World Bank reform and the MDB's reform, and we can comment a little bit on that. But the point is that we want to help our clients to do that. So we are investing a lot. We have set targets on sustainable finance mobilization. We have a target of 300 billion euros from 2018 to 2025 in sustainable finance, not only climate, but also nature and inclusive growth. We have already mobilized 185 billion. And we also have targets on net zero targets, according to the Net Zero Banking Alliance, which is an alliance covering the 140 banks in the world, and defining targets at sector level in power, oil and gas, auto, cement, steel, sector by sector, intermediate targets by 2030, in line with the IEA scenario, and engaging with our clients to help them to change, because that's our role. Our role is not to reduce our finance emissions. Our role is to finance the emissions reduction from our clients. And we're having very good success in the region, although it's quite challenging. Thanks to the support from the MDBs, we can amplify the risks that we have. Thanks to the IDB, thanks to CAF, thanks to the IFC. We have quite a lot of agreements with them, trying to mobilize these, not only at a big project level, but also in renewable, in mobility, and obviously even in energy efficiency mortgages in countries where are quite difficult, so also at the retail level. So the challenges, I have to summarize, one is how to attract capital at the right scale, the reform that we have to do. That will be one topic later. And then connecting to nature, let me share only a brief example, because I said water stress, it's a key topic, especially where we have 45% of the energy is hydro in the region. We did a water stress just a couple of months ago. We mapped 7,000 assets, power plants of all our clients in the world, 7,000, using ENCORE, which is a tool from UNEP-FI and the World Resources Institute Aqueduct, which is another tool. And we identified that 23% of our exposure will be in those power plants, will be in water stress in 2040. So banks are starting not only developing solutions, we are starting to assess risk, and now that's the conversation we want to have with our clients in the region and everywhere, to say how we can help you not only to decarbonize, but only how we can help you to adapt better to the business model to this. So this is a good example, connecting dots with the conversation. Okay?
Absolutely. Big mission. Big
Yeah.
mission. Wow. Now that we have already all the people from the panel has intervened, I would like to ask the same question to all of you and to try to bring this discussion even a little bit more to earth. No? So my question for you is, we know, and you have all mentioned this, we have a huge challenge ahead of us when it comes to the deployment of renewables from many different perspectives, many different angles. There are many topics that have been addressed here, but if you have to choose one specific instrument, one success story that you believe that really can move the needle in this topic, in terms of scaling up, in terms of effectiveness, replicability, or even not to engage citizens, what would that be? Can you think of one specific action that you believe can really make a difference here? What do you think? We can continue in the same way, starting with Valerie, or however you feel better?
I mean, in some ways, I think the blended finance facilities, us, IDB, others have set up this idea, I love it, of originate loans to share.
Yeah.
Is exactly right. I think having done that for green hydrogen in Chile, particularly where the technological risk and the market risk is still very high, I think is particularly important. So that to us has been something that's replicable. Of course, it's not new. It's been done. We've done it before. We've done it for other sectors. It's not just an energy sector. So I think there are lots of success stories there. But at the end of the day, with $270 billion needed in the next 27 years, these blended facilities are key. And figuring out how to manage the institutional weakness, not just in the public sector, but the presumed institutional weakness on the private sector, which is leading to very weak creditworthiness. That's why these blended facilities matter, but setting them up in a way that they can be quick and that the reputation that MDBs have for being a little bit slow because we like to make sure that everything is done right because it's public money and we can't waste it, we can't lose it.
Yeah.
We need to make sure that the blended finance facilities don't replicate the heavy transaction costs and can be swift. So the green hydrogen facility in Chile is an example I suggest people look at for us as something very recent that we think can be replicated.
Thank you, Valerie.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned before the case of Uruguay where we used initial blended finance, but I think that if I have to think through it, it's not only having the resources of blended finance, we also have to look at the whole, just to make sure that we get to the deployment, the whole value chain of the infrastructure project, right? Because the worst thing that can happen is that you get the project, you get the financing, and then the solar panels are stuck in immigration and customs, right? So like we have to see the whole process holistically, like I think was mentioned before, and not only, you know, have the solar farm, but also make sure that you have the green transmission line. So I really like the point that was mentioned before of this holistic view, that the project is not, and taking it to different levels, is not only that project, but let's figure out and make sure that this project will be connected, because otherwise you're putting a lot of energy, a lot of resources, and then you won't be able to connect.
Okay. Yep. Well, I would focus, if I had to choose one, I would focus on how to create the right conditions to mobilize private capital at a scale, and a lot of ideas have been already commented, and it's part of the new architecture that is being redefined now, unfortunately, with the new president at the World Bank, no, and also will have implications for all MDBs, no. I think the first idea is each MDB should have a target on private capital mobilization, not only on climate finance, not only 50 billion, no. Tell me which is your target in your private capital mobilization, to create the right incentives to work all together. That will probably change radically the way that decisions are taken, even within the MDBs. And I know that some of them are already on this way, no? So that's important.
You mean the MDBs working with the private sector? Or
no, MDBs working with the private sector. So the idea is, as Hilen said before, no? I mean, it's not so important if they provide a loan of $100 million to a specific project. This idea to origin to share and attract more private capital. Even the resources should be more dedicated not to loans, should be more dedicated to guarantees and to the risk mechanism, first loss mechanism, that multiply by 6, by 10, what the public funding is there. So we have a commitment of $100 billion a year that probably this year is going to be delivered at the end. We have to set another new target in 1 year, or by 2025. And, but with 100 billion, if you see the estimations that we need in emerging economies, we need only on energy 1 trillion every year, only. So China take out. And so with 100 billion you cannot, and only energy, but if you add everything, you will have practically 3 to 4 trillion. So it is absolutely critical to multiply that figure by 6, by 10, thanks to the private capital. So I want to say that I think it's important. So the risk mechanisms are at another scale is what we need, no, without losing the famous AAA, no. But I think there is some room to work on that, and because let me conclude, the transition will only happen if there is economic sense. So money is ready to go, but has to have economic sense for financial institutions, for banks, for investors, and also at the end for the companies, the sponsors, the promoters, developers, and they need to have data stability in terms of regulation. They need to have certainty. They need to have good off-takers. So they need a lot of things to happen to reduce the risk of a project and create the real economic sense. And we have to create that economic sense, because in some cases, well, we can say Green steel is not there yet. Okay. Green cement, still not yet. Not only in the emerging, but also in Europe. But on energy, renewable energy, on efficiency, on mobility, we don't have an excuse. There is the business case is there, but we have to create the conditions to the risk. That's my request.
The good news, by the way, is that I'm sure with the IDB, certainly for the bank, we do have private capital mobilization targets. So for our private sector arm, it's 80%. And for our public sector arm in middle-income countries, it's 25%. So those targets are there and they're being pushed, but they're difficult to do. They're not so easy, which is good. We like hard things to do.
Well, I mean, I can't look at this from a sort of multinational or international perspective so much as European, but I think if you just go back a few years, what has helped mobilize private capital in Europe has been a very strong political signal. The European Green Deal, in very broad terms, I think, set a very clear sense of direction. And an associated branding, but also institutional change of direction or emphasis for the European Investment Bank. And then the sustainable finance agenda. So the taxonomy and all of the very detailed, granular work that tries to essentially calculate differently what the risk is and obviously therefore what the benefit or the disadvantage is. That is starting to help mobilize the private capital at scale in a way which we do need. It's work in progress. There are lots of problems with it obviously still, but I think that underpinning of the whole process still has a way to go. And I think, I mean, I was struck, I do a lot of work on trying to assess competitiveness. And we assess competitiveness using classical economic measurements and tools, which do not incorporate all of the need to measure and value biodiversity or natural capital more broadly. And we still don't properly value it in all of the ways in which we're trying to deploy this private, let alone public capital. So I think it's a partial success. We've got a lot further to go, but I think that the more rapid scaling will also come when we measure and account for those other environmental and social attributes within our underlying economic models. And that's a much bigger question, I appreciate. But I think there is quite an acceleration of that process happening internationally, certainly from what I'm aware of in a European context. And that will, I think, also help catalyze all the things that you've said at another rate of pace on top.
Mark, sorry, Kepa, if I can, I think this is a question that Latin America is going to have to grapple with, as we've seen Europe and the US in many ways follow China in terms of how it has decided to accelerate the transition to renewable energy, and that's by using industrial policy. Something that Europe and the US hadn't done for generations, and China has consistently done. And instead, just like in Latin America, the market was let make decisions about supporting whatever was most profitable. And so it'll be interesting to see, and I think it's a decision that many countries in Latin America are going to have to take, is how much do they want to push an industrial policy to push the market? Because is the market going to, with all of the blended finance, all of the PCM targets, everything else, will it go fast enough? I think that's an interesting policy question that countries are grappling with.
Absolutely. I mean, we have the IRA, we have the Net Zero Industry Act that is going to see the light probably in a few months. And then where you place Latin America, where you place Asia, or those regions in the world, how they're going to be competitive in this, and this is another barrier to attract private capital, because the incentives and the environmental that are being created in these regions are obviously. But I honestly think that if we reduce, obviously, with an holistic approach, the risk to invest, money, there is a huge amount of money, but we have to create the right conditions, as you said before.
Well, time-wise, I still have questions for the panel, but I don't know if maybe it's a good idea to open the discussion to the floor to see if you have any question around here. If not, I will continue, but I'd like to give you the opportunity to ask questions. No, I hate it when it ends. No one has the time to ask anything. So. Any questions? It comes from Iker, so it will be a difficult question. Let me warn you.
has to do with carbon markets. We have heard, the question would be, how do you think carbon markets can help accelerate the deployment of renewables? So it is a very, very general question. And secondly, what is your bank doing in terms of understanding and benefiting what is coming in terms of new carbon markets and Article 6? Thank you.
Thank you. It was not that difficult.
It's difficult enough. I think
Short answer.
the first thing on carbon markets that we have to remember is they're always going to be the cherry on top. And I think this idea that somehow they're going to drive a transition is not true. It's one revenue stream. The challenge for a lot of new renewables is that it's a end-of-pipe revenue stream after you've done the work. So the challenge becomes, how do you actually get the project finance up front? One of the things we've been doing at the World Bank is innovating new outcome-based bonds as a way to try and bridge for some companies the time between when they can deliver the emissions reductions and get them certified and get the revenue, but that they can't access the money up front to actually do that. Using, and basically an advanced market commitment, using the forward purchase of emissions reductions as the collateral. So there's some interesting, innovative financial engineering happening, but we have to manage expectations on carbon markets. Even with new compliance markets, it's always going to be the cherry on top.
Yeah, I could. I don't know if you consider the compliance markets or the voluntary markets, because we have a specific unit in the bank helping our clients in the regulatory markets in Europe and also for voluntary markets. I am a little bit worried in general because we are trying to solve the greenwashing claims, which is very relevant, and that can kill the market at the end, no? And the possibilities. So from one side, we need better standards. That's clear to avoid double counting. So the work that's being done, the principles, that's perfect. But also on the demand side, at least in Europe, we start to see some worrying signals, no? Because at the end, if the supervisor says that any claim you want to do, if you are using offsets or carbon credits to make an additional step in your work on reduction emissions, that could be considered as a greenwashing, simply greenwashing. You are not creating the right incentives for any corporate to say, let's do the extra mile to reduce certain emissions that we are not achieving today, but maybe in the future. But meanwhile, let's get some carbon credits for that, no? So that we are not creating the right incentives to create the demand. This, together with the lack of, let's say, integrity of the work at the supply side, we have the perfect storm that to reach the point, no? And I think that avoided emissions is something that will not have a long run. I mean, maybe obviously nature-based solutions that are really, really under control can have a future. Obviously, our engineering solutions can have a future, but avoided emissions, I don't see that will have a future on the carbon credits. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, if I can complement, I think the issue of carbon markets has had a lot of attention, good and bad attention. And when you look to the point of compliance versus voluntary carbon markets, and you go to the region, you don't see a lot of countries ready for Article 6. Some of them have registry, some do not. We're actually working with the World Bank, with the public side of IDB and us, to do trainings, because there is a lack of training in terms of exactly what's going to happen, how do they prepare for the compliance carbon markets with the changes that happened. And there's the issue, yes, we can work with private companies and tell them what's the trend and what's happening with carbon credits, but that shouldn't be, as Tony just said, or maybe I like the idea of the cherry on the top. It shouldn't be the only mechanism, only instrument that we use. There are sustainability-linked bonds, sustainability-linked loans. There are so many, climate swaps or nature swaps. There are different things that we could use. And carbon credits right now, while I think there is an option, there is the issue of who's going to supply the carbon credits, but also who buys them. And knowing, who is the off-taker is also relevant, because part of the discussion is if we're going to do carbon credits for the oil companies to continue doing exactly what they were doing and just have carbon credits, what did we achieve? Nothing. So I think we have to be careful, and at least our approach, we haven't been involved heavily on carbon markets as of yet in IDB Group. We're working because we know it's one instrument, but that's why we're partnering with the World Bank, that they have a lot of reports on carbon markets. They have a specific unit as well. So to bring to the region the best available knowledge.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's clearly two dimensions, I think, to your question. The voluntary carbon market, where I think it's quite right that there have been lots of questions posed. There is a risk that the baby is thrown out with the bathwater completely, which would send the wrong signal to some corporates who need this as the way to achieve their targets. And we risk having an unintended consequence to restricting them to the point where it's impossible. But they need better management and systems and accountability and so on and so forth. Carbon pricing, as in cap and trade, I think I totally agree. I tend to say it's more of a background signal rather than the lead driver. Cherry on the cake is a good way of putting it. And the European experience, I would say, of this is that for years of developing a carbon price signal, it was when there were phase-outs, quotas, restrictions that we saw very rapid transition to electric vehicles, for example. The carbon price was simply going to be much too high to trigger the change in investment thinking for car companies or the investors in car companies. So it needed regulatory push, which comes back to some extent to that question of industrial strategy as well. But therefore it plays a role. It clearly needs to be priced in and will play a greater and greater role as the price increases. But in the short term, we don't have enough time for that price to work through. It needs to have complementary regulatory measures of some sort, depending on the products or the services or the value chain we're talking about. So we need both.
Yeah, because probably carbon markets is one of the examples somehow of what we were talking about, no? Because we were talking about having some certainty about the future, some legal framework in order to invest. And in renewables specifically, no, what we find in Latin America is that the developers of renewable projects, they don't know what they can do. If they can issue any credits, they're thinking about maybe gold standard, then gold standard say, no, you cannot. Then they were thinking about GCC, then no, it's better third carbono, then Article 6 is being developed, or maybe the IREX. So it's a lot of confusion, no, for renewable energy developers in Latin America. No? So it's an instrument, as you all were saying, but still, no, if we really believe that this is going to make a big difference, probably it's not going to be the case, at least not in the short term. We still have time for one last question. Pablo?
Thank you very much. One issue many of you raised was the fact of engaging with local authorities or communities and so on. For me, it's like the local monster. Everybody's talking about this, but it's actually very difficult to really get to grasp a good example. So right now at Redeia, we are kicking off a new project in which we are involving different communities. But I can tell you, it's really tricky because you are confronted to this dilemma. Sometimes, well, of course, you have got to engage with local authorities, with councillors, with the municipalities and so on. And that's inscribed into the local legislation. But then erasing that bar and going and sitting around with grassroots organizations, that's something very different and very difficult. As it is a dilemma, because sometimes we are confronted to this idea or point, well, why should we be sitting around with these people if they're quiet? We don't really need to actually engage with them. And on the other side, the councillors or the municipalities are saying, I'll handle the municipality, the social aspect of this project. Don't worry, I can. So at the end, we sense that it's really important to be brave and bold enough to really sit down with these people and comment and explain how the project is going to be developed. But well, the question was mainly for you, sir, if you could provide a good example of success of this actual engaging with the society.
So at a local level rather than internationally, because I think you're quite right that the real challenge is not at a European or international level here in terms of the concept. It's the implementation on the ground where these issues are felt in a real sense and very differently when we're sitting in a room like this. I think the experience that I'm aware of is that when communities are genuinely debating issues like this and work them through, then they do conclude, they make the trade-offs themselves. They can see the trade-offs. It has to be an open, honest, democratic, participatory discussion, but you're more likely to get a good decision in sustainability terms, in climate terms, if you engage in that. And I think there are local examples, certainly in Scandinavia, where we're now starting to address mining questions, for example, which we didn't address in Europe, certainly, for recent time. There are other bad examples, obviously, where these issues haven't been properly resolved in Europe. But I think the examples that do succeed are the ones where it takes time, but there's no substitute for doing exactly what you said. There's no shortcut. But I think that the results tend to illustrate what we find when we come to meetings like this more broadly. There are certain routes which are closed off when you start to work through the options and the decisions, as long as the benefits are shared, as well as the effort or responsibilities. I think the sharing of benefits is crucial to local and regional buy-in.
But I think this is true of all linear infrastructure, and it's something that we don't hear enough about at COPs and we don't hear enough about in the discussions on renewable energy, is how do we strengthen environmental impact systems so that they don't end up, because they're so loose, because they're absent, they end up leading to litigation down the road. And one of the reasons Peru struggles to spend 50 cents of every dollar that it allocates of its own budget to public infrastructure is that it starts something, the EIA process is weak, has gaps, and then you end up with litigation and they're stuck in courts for years. And this is part of the sort of regulatory uncertainty in weak institutions that makes financial sector very uneasy about working when you think the technology might be right, we're working with a good company, but at the end of the day, if you can't get the environmental license or if the local community comes out and protests it and everything is so weak that we're going to end up in court for a decade, no thank you. And so I think we need to talk more about how to build strong environmental impact rules, which most of Latin America has in terms of rules, but it's weak enforcement. And that's something that will have to be fixed if we want to accelerate at scale the renewable energy transition, the second generation in Latin.
Okay, thank you. We haven't finished yet because we still have the closing remarks. But before we go to the closing remarks, please an applause for the panelists. And now,
very quick.
Very quick.
Very quick. No, I'm going to now to speak on behalf of the Grupo Español de Crecimiento Verde, the Spanish Green Growth Group. I'm a board member. Gonzalo, the chair, couldn't be with us because he has another meeting at the same time. So excuses. And well, only on behalf of the group, helps to the CAF, helps to the Spanish Association, and for joining today, Valerie, Martin, Hilen, and the previous speakers, Eva and Alicia. I think that I took 4 key takeaways, or 5. One, this is an opportunity for Latin, for South America, so this is clearly an opportunity where we see. The second one, we need an holistic approach. It's not only energy, it's about nature, it's about inclusion, it's about communities. The third one is we need to have the right enabling environment to create the dynamics that we need at the scale. Fourth, we need to partner with the whole value chain. It's also mentioned that we did. And finally, we need the collective advocacy, no? And the experience of the Green Growth Group maybe could be something could be replicated in that way of collaboration makes the change. So thanks a lot. Enjoy COP.
Thank you very much. We'll see each other in the next COP.
Yeah, we go now to the next
event.
to the next panel.
Successful.
Wherever that may be.
Yeah, absolutely. I wish we knew, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very nice to meet you. Nice to meet you.
Yes, and I
Keep
hope,
contact.
yeah.
Oh, yeah. Let's take a picture. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Eva.